Welcome, everybody, to the Healing Place podcast. I'm your host, Teri Wellbrock. And you know, I'm always smiling when I start recording, if you're watching this on the YouTube channel, because I just had these beautiful, wonderful guests. I was honored to be a guest on my today's guests podcast recently. And so we had such a beautiful conversation, and I'll be sharing all that on my socials. Today, I'm welcoming Warwick Fairfax, and he is best-selling author, storyteller, host of Beyond the Crucible podcast, speaker, and ICF-certified coach, which I looked up as International Coach Federation. So now I know what ICF is. So welcome, Warwick.
Thank you so much, Teri.
Yes, well, I loved being on your show. We had just a fabulous conversation about so much incredible beauty and depth of, so talk to us about, which I learned when I first connected with you, Beyond the Crucible. What does that mean? What is that?
Well, Beyond the Crucible is it's all about crucible experiences, which for us means life-altering experiences that are typically incredibly painful. And Beyond the Crucible is the basic thesis is, how do you not let your worst day define you? And we've had people, we have, in a sense, a similar space, but we've had people with physical crucibles, victims of abuse, financial failure, loss of loved ones, different kinds of pain from people of all different kinds of backgrounds. And so how do you not let that worst day define you? Sometimes you can't alter what happened, like a physical crucible. There's only so much range of motion you can come back from, typically with those sorts of things. But how do you make a choice not to be angry and bitter? And how do you find a way to live a life affirming, a life focused on others? So that's the basic thesis. And as I'm sure we'll get into, that's, every, I guess, book, every story, every podcast, if you will, has an origin story. So there's a reason I do what I do, but that's basically what Beyond the Crucible is.
Yes. And I think I read somewhere, it may have been on your website, that are you seeing a pattern? Are you seeing finding that it's almost like, I know with me, like I become a researcher, because I do, when I talk to my guests, I find, oh, how many went through this thing, right? This thing. And then everything shifted. They walked away from corporate jobs or whatever, and started this business of healing and helping people. So are you finding that same thing?
We really are. I mean, we commissioned a 11,000 person statistically valid survey, which we have an assessment, which we're updating in the next few weeks. But between that quantitative study and I guess you would call the qualitative study of, we just hit our 200th episode, actually in the last week or two. So just looking at our guests, what's fascinating to me is, despite the diversity of experiences, as I mentioned, all kinds of different crucibles, we have men, women, we have, all races, backgrounds, nationalities, ages, a very diverse group of people, but yet the path back is almost identical. So amidst diversity, there's uniformity of path back, which I find fascinating. And basically that's making a choice not to be defined by what happened to you or the mistakes you made, and learning the lessons of your crucible, certainly, especially if it was your fault. There are lessons to be learned, and finding a way to find a vision. Very often the guests we've had, their vision has come directly out of their crucible. So we had a woman that was a victim of financial abuse, and she was very successful, a New York publishing executive, highly intelligent, but even highly intelligent people can find themselves in positions in which they wonder, how did I get here? And that's a whole nother story. But she tries to help other women, get out of abusive relationships. It's not easy, few listen, but it doesn't, but like with anybody who soldiers on in very difficult territory, one life saved is the difference. You can't quote unquote save everybody. But we have many stories like that in which people use what they've gone through to find a vision to help others. So it's just
Yes.
fascinating to me, amidst the diversity, there is a common path back, which again I find amazing.
That is amazing, but it's so true now that I think about it. And what you just said about, helping, if you can just help that one. And I had someone tell me one time, and it had such a profound effect on me. He said, by helping one, we help all. And that was very powerful because the way he explained it was, we're all connected. Like we're all connected, whether you call it energy or spirit or whatever that it love, whatever. And I thought, oh, because you do have this like, oh, I want to shout it from the rooftops and, help everybody heal once you find your way onto the path. Um, yeah, interesting. So now, do you share? I should have asked you before we hit record your crucible moment.
Yes, that's really the origin story. People always, before you can try and help others, they want to know, well, why do you care? How do I know that you get me or even want to get me? And, nobody can fully understand somebody else's pain, especially if you haven't gone through that identical set of circumstances, which is, not always common. But for me, I grew up in this very different background. I grew up in a 150-year-old family media business in Australia. It was massive. It had the Australian equivalent of the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, the major opinion leaders of our country. Um, it was started by a person of great faith who did it, the right way. He was a wonderful husband, wonderful father. When he died, his employees said, "We've lost a kind and valued friend." There were no worker rights laws in the 1800s. You could pretty much do what you wanted to do. Elderly's Church founded every, I don't know, charity you can imagine. I mean, just a life well lived. But by the time I grew up, there was a lot of money and power, and they weren't bad people per se, but money and power does something. So my dad was married 3 times, my mother twice. I was from the last marriage of each. When you grow up amidst wealth, there's often, it's not a good environment for children, typically irrespective of the parents. It just, they're busy and work or charity, society things, the usual things. But for me, I guess growing up, I think it's the parable of the prodigal son. I was a quote unquote good son. I kind of stayed home. I worked hard, got good grades. I took life very seriously. I wasn't going to be some dilettante, good for nothing kid. That was not my way. I'm gonna almost have a chip on my shoulder. I'm gonna be different. I'm going to show you can come from a wealthy background and still work hard and take life seriously. So that actually made life a lot worse because it raised my parents' expectations, certainly my father. He was more present for me than maybe his younger kids. He was more of a grandfather age when I was growing up. So I had a very good relationship with him. And he didn't have to say to me, Warwick, you have to do this. It was unspoken. I knew if I didn't go to the family business, it would devastate him. And since I dearly loved him, there's no way I was going to disappoint him. So I never felt like I had a choice. So I did my undergrad degree at Oxford, like my dad and some other relatives had done, worked on Wall Street, got my MBA at Harvard Business School. None of it was because I had a passion for business per se or media. It was all, this is my duty. We're providing a service to the nation. Don't I care about my country? Don't I care about the people who live to have media that kind of challenges people that need to be challenged? Without getting into too much detail, we never did like some other media moguls favors for mates. There was no partisanship about, who the papers would support. It was all about doing the right thing. So basically, that was crucible enough with the expectations. But my dad died in early '87 as I was finishing my last year at Harvard Business School. My parents, at least before my father died, felt like the company wasn't being well run or run on the image of the founder. Actually, some other family members threw my dad out as chairman like about 11 years before in 1976, which as a 15-year-old was devastating. How could they do that to my dad, who I dearly loved? So here it is in 1987, in my youthful naivety with my dad having died, launched this $2.25 billion takeover. Again, change management, bring the company back to the image of the founder. Things went wrong right from the start. Other family members sold out. They didn't want to be in a company controlled by a 26-year-old, which is understandable. Too much debt. And within 3 years, when Australia got in a big recession, the company went under. Yes, I brought in new management, increased operating profits 80% the first year. But the debt was so high, it didn't really matter, especially in a recession. So believe it or not, that is the short version of my crucible, both growing up. And so, yeah, you could say a loss of a business, and money wasn't important to me. But the crucible really for me was not so much the loss of money, but I felt like I caused friction within the family, which wasn't my intention. I was responsible for a 150-year-old family business going into bankruptcy, and it was eventually taken over by somebody else, causing instability amongst 4,000 plus employees, which, it was no small thing. They felt safe with the Fairfax family. They felt like this was a place they were protected. So, and probably the worst of it all is I came to faith for me. I grew up in the Anglican church, and yeah, I wouldn't, my parents weren't evangelical or anything. They had sort of spiritual, they had faith, but I came to faith in Christ through an evangelical Anglican church at Oxford. So in my misguided theology, I felt like the founder was a person of faith. I'm a person of faith. There was some grand divine plan, and I blew that divine plan. I mean, poor theology, but we're human. Beliefs they're not always line up with something that's logical. So that was just crippling to me. There was some divine plan, and I blew it because of my youthful naivety. And so, yeah, that's basically the crucible. I felt terrible about myself. I wasn't clinically depressed, but I just felt, I'll never have the kind of impact that I could have had then. And, what have I done? And how I had a Harvard MBA. How stupid could I have been? How could I have made so many stupid assumptions like the family wouldn't sell out? So that's kind of in a nutshell the crucible. And it took me, years to be able to bounce back from that and to be able to move forward. It was not easy. And, it's the last thing I'll say is this is not the kind of crucible other people can relate to. Like, whether it's a cancer survivor or abuse and as one guest said on our podcast, it's not a competition to see who's had the worst crucible. I don't mean to say that I feel like mine is nothing compared to a lot of other people's, but you don't find a support group of former media moguls who were, had good intentions, but blew it, me
Right.
too. So it's a very lonely path. Doesn't mean it's worse than others. I think it's not as bad as others, but it felt very lonely. And what do I do now? So yeah, that's my crucible, if you will.
Well, thank you so much for sharing. And you're right. I mean, as you talked, and we talked about this on your show, there was so much that I related to. Well, I don't relate to the story, like living the exact version. There was just so much there, like that shame and guilt part of it. Wow, the faith component of it, because I remember my mom, told you my dad was a Jesuit brother for 8 years in the Catholic Church, and before leaving and marrying my mom wanted to be a nun, but they wouldn't let her in because she drank too much, which still kills me. And so, so I grew up getting this message of, God made you, so smart because you have to, like save the world kind of thing. So I grew up thinking, oh, you have to be a doctor. So as a little kid, as a 4-year-old, what do you want to be? I want to be a doctor. I want to be a doctor. I want to save people because I'm so smart and that's what God wants me to do. So man, that really hit home. Yeah,
I hear
powerful,
you.
powerful stuff. So now, just out of curiosity, did you did you find yourself like falling away or pulling away from your faith as you grappled with that? And then what was your journey back? Like how did you find, because I know you're a man of faith.
Sure.
How'd you find your way
Yeah.
back?
It's interesting. We're all wired differently, and I'm wired that if something is wrong in the world, it's my fault. So I don't blame other people, I blame myself. I'm not saying that's good or bad. It's just my natural human wiring, if you will. So I think when you go through a crucible, you either reject your faith, values, philosophy, it could be another religion, another spiritual frame of reference. I kind of doubled down and I began to realize my theology was off. which was, from my perspective, God loves us all unconditionally. He doesn't need our stuff. God is not a God of guilt. He's a God of love. Um, yes, there's truth and love, and that's a balance. But yeah, I felt like despite my stupidity and naivety, if God had wanted it to succeed, he would have, if you believe in a sovereign God. So it's like, okay, maybe he has a different plan for my life. Maybe he always did. Maybe there's no way I would have gotten out without that. And the truth be told, I wouldn't. Duty, they say in the US military, duty, honor, country. I've never served in the military, but I'm hardwired, that whole sense of duty. So I felt like God had a different plan for my life. So that helped me. I was blessed that I be married to my wife. I guess this May will be 35 years. She's American. I met her in Australia. She comes from a far more normal background than I did. And just, we weren't poverty stricken. We weren't as wealthy, but we were fine. Just that unconditional love from her. I had, our kids were born in the 90s. So that helped. Eventually I found some meaningful work, but that sort of bedrock of God loves me unconditionally, uh, and the love of my wife and my kids. And I mean, that was sort of massive. So I really kind of almost like being on a ship in a storm, clung to that mast and dug in more. And yeah, I mean, that was really the key, that, maybe God had a different plan. And I think he measures us by how many lives we save. And, are we, Dr. Schweitzer in Africa, and are we doing, Mother Teresa? And most of us will say, well, what we do is just nothing compared to, pick your favorite hero, Martin Luther King or Mother Teresa. And just, well, maybe that's objectively true, but it doesn't matter. I think God, whoever's up there, he loves it just because of who we are. So what you do with the Healing Place and I do with Beyond the Crucible, if we're following what we believe is our divine calling or spiritual calling, whatever our spiritual frame of reference is, it's enough. It's not a competition to see who can save the most people, right? It's just being faithful to our own calling. So I kind of relearned my theology, if you will, because it was a bit off. So yeah, does that make sense? So I kind of
Oh,
really clung
yes.
to it, but I reframed it, if you will, my
Right. No,
understanding.
beautiful. And what a beautiful message that, God is a God of love. I mean, it's just pure truth. My mom so my mom passed away on my birthday, 2023. And
Mm,
we had a beautiful forgiveness journey the last couple of years of her life. And she was a huge fan of Saint Teresa. I was named, Maria Teresa,
mhm,
named after Saint Teresa, my middle name. And what she loved most about her was her message of um, do little things with great love. And so as you
mm,
spoke, that's what I was
mm.
hearing. Like, you're right, we don't have to be the Mother Teresas of the world, or the person that's saving everybody, but just doing those little things with great love, what an impact that has on it, just the ripple effect, right?
It's so true. And I know we talked about this before, but just this whole area of forgiveness. I mean, the biggest thing I had to forgive with myself, because I was just merciless. And in fact, in my book, Crucible Leadership, I spend a lot of time about my own mistakes, and I don't really talk about others, but yeah, I had to forgive myself, but I also had to forgive other family members. I mean, who, like, for instance, threw my father out as chairman. They may have had a reason. And you grew up in a wealthy background. There's some level of dysfunction. So I had close family members I needed to, forgive, and for various things. And, often the ideal forgiveness is when somebody comes to you, I'll just make a bit of hyperbole, weeping, and it says, I'm so sorry, I wronged you, please forgive me. In the real world, that rarely happens, and so it's harder to forgive when it's like you felt like you were wronged, you felt like things happened that were damaging to you, for me growing up. And it's like, okay, doesn't mean I condone it, but I've got to forgive, because for me to move forward, lack of forgiveness is going to, as I often say, it's like drinking poison. So I've had advisors I've had to forgive way back when in the takeover years. I mean, I've had a lot of practice, As unfortunately, I have a feeling you probably had more practice than you would like, but that's part of the journey of being whole, is And every once in a while, like a little tinge of resentment will come back, or a memory or trigger. It's like, oh, it's a bit like weeding. Like, oh, I know where that one is. Okay, let's identify the issue. I'll talk with my wife. What's triggering me? Identify it, define it, deal with it, forgive. And from my spiritual frame of reference, pray, Lord, give me the strength to kind of forgive and move on. But you don't get back from trauma or crucibles without trying to get good at forgiving, at least trying. And, you've got to, for your own self and your family and others, if you don't forgive, you know, you'll take it out on others. It's just inevitable, you know.
Yes.
So, and
Yeah.
they don't deserve that, you know,
Right.
our kids and our friends. And so anyway, I've often think about that a lot because, yeah, it would be so easy for me to have a list of people that did things that were wrong and be angry. And that doesn't help anybody. I mean, it doesn't help you, that's for sure.
Right.
That makes sense.
Well, I'm glad you asked, because that was one of the questions I was going to ask, is if you had a particular forgiveness, I don't want to say ritual, but a practice. Practice, I guess, is better to use. And you said prayer. And I know prayer has been a big part of mine, but I had another friend who was working on her master's at Xavier University in theology, and we had gone to breakfast together, and we were talking about forgiveness. And I said, at the time, I hadn't yet stepped onto the healing path, so I was still in my, panic attacks and anxiety and just everything from my trauma. And so we were talking about it, and at the time, I was like, I'm going to forgive these, blah blah blahs. Like, there's no way. And she said, Teri, write a letter to God and ask for, like how you can work through this. And I was like, oh, that's a really good idea. Or write letters of forgiveness to these people and just keep writing. And so I started that practice, and really it was kind of prayerful. Because I'm writing a letter to God, right? But wow, it was amazing what came through and how much I was able to release and realize. And not to make this about me, but I haven't talked about this for a while on the show, and I'm just going to share really quick. So during the two bank robberies I was in when I was 21, and 3 months later, um, the perpetrator was put on death row in Ohio. And so I would check on him every now and then, just to kind of be like, oh, is he still in prison? Is he back out on the streets? Very nervous, anxiety, is he going to come find me because I testified against him? And I got on and I couldn't find him. And I said, I got really nervous. Anyway, long story short, finally got a hold of the prison, and they said, oh yeah, he died 2 weeks ago of natural causes. And I remember falling to my knees and sobbing and saying, I hope you found peace. I hope you found forgiveness, because it was in that like aha moment that I realized that he and I had both been born these innocent little creatures, right? These little people, these little babies. And I didn't know his story. Not that I justified his actions, but I didn't know, like, was he horribly abused? What had happened to him that he ended up choosing this very dark path? And so it helped me forgive his human choices, but really, like, love his soul and his light, and wish for him that he found his way to God, that he found his way to that light and love. um because while his human choices were truly unforgivable, because he shot and murdered a coworker and so much more, his soul was forgivable. Does that make sense?
It does. And what you're sharing is so profound, Teri, because I found just with close family members who, really, you know, besides the whole takeover that really, damaged me, to understand their story of why doesn't mean it makes their actions justifiable, but I began to understand, okay, they were broken, they were hurt. You can't know everything. I guess people who hurt people don't often tell you, well, this is why. They probably don't even know why. But I began to kind of have a pretty good idea of maybe some of the elements. And, there can be a gift amidst, I don't want to say it's so many of our guests on our podcast have said what I went through was a gift, even physical crucibles. I don't pretend to understand that in one sense. I do in one sense, and another I don't. But I guess the gift for me is just, with my kids and my wife. I mean, she is an incredible, loving, selfless mother. I mean, they really hit the jackpot in my wife. And my kids grow up normal. They don't have the expectations of a family business. I bend over backwards to say, I just want you to be happy. I want you to use your gifts to do whatever you want to do with them. I have no agenda other than I just want you to be happy and fulfilled. Well, of course, I have extremely strong opinions on that, given the way I grew up, right? Yeah, I'm not going to be telling them you can do anything you want as long as it's a banker, a doctor, a lawyer, a whatever. I'm not like that. And so they're all like early 30s to 20s. They're all doing very well. They have good values. They work hard. They're people of character. Well, and I feel blessed. Well, that didn't happen in a vacuum. Yes, I have my whole mantra of do whatever, whatever makes you happy. But they have an incredible, loving mother who is, there's no agenda, no guilt trip. So when you go through certain things, the gift can be how you treat, your kids, your friends. You say, I'm going to go a different path, and there can be blessing that comes from pain, if you will, if you choose to go that direction, right? The path of blessing or the path of pain, and this probably better than I do. How many people who've been abused abuse others? I don't pretend to understand how. I know that's what the statistics say, that I just can't fathom it. But whatever your cycle is, break the cycle, right? So that your kids and your friends will be different. I don't know whether that makes sense, but amidst the pain, there can be a blessing. And yes, it does help if you understand why the person acted the way they did. Doesn't make it right. Somehow it makes it easier to accept and forgive in some strange way, if that makes sense.
That makes so much sense. And I tell myself all the time, and I try to tell other people, my kids particularly, everyone is on their own healing journey. And we don't know their journey. People don't walk around, if we all had our like kind of like Boy Scout and Girl Scout patches, like had our badges of honor of what we've been through. You could like look at folks and be like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you went through that. Me too. But we don't
That
wear
would
it.
be kind of
So
that would be kind of interesting amongst a trusted circle. That would be kind of, I don't know if the word is fun, but that would be a fascinating experiment.
it would, like if we all had, yeah, like we had our patches and wore them. But what's so it makes me think about our conversation when on your show when we were talking about, oh, you have somebody who's maybe been through this one really horrific thing, and then they see the person with the coat that has 45 patches on it. And then they're
Right.
standing in the corner like, oh, I'm not worthy to be in this room because I just had the one thing, right? But it's
There's always more, and that's what I think. As I shared, we had a guest on our show, David Charbonnet, who was injured, paralyzed as a Navy SEAL, and his dad was a SEAL, and people would be apologetic because, according to his dad, he was as good a Navy SEAL as there is, and you don't say that in that community if you don't think it's true. When I was so embarrassed, almost embarrassed about what I went through, I said, you know what, Warwick, no, your worst day is your worst day. Your pain is, the worst pain ever to you. And that was such a gift. And I've heard other people say that. And so I've come to realize, okay, it's not a competition. I don't have to be embarrassed and feel like, gosh, I could just say what I went through compared to what you went through, Teri, it's like nothing. It's just like, 1.0001% level compared to, and that's not helpful because then it starts making you feel guilty. There's always people who, well, typically, they talk in sports about the greatest of all time. Few of us are saying, okay, I've never met anybody that went through anything worse than me. I mean, typically we can find somebody that was like, gosh, I thought what I went through is bad, but man, now I've found somebody that's actually worse than me, you know, or whatever. So it just demeans your experience. It demeans yourself and your soul, and it's not helpful, you know. Doesn't mean, you should say, oh, what I went through is worse than anybody else. No, it's real to you, and you have nothing to be ashamed or embarrassed about. So that's been a learning experience for me.
oh, and I 100% it's like I so understand and get it and say the same thing. It's if we can just honor one another's journeys. And because we've all been through, like, and I say the same thing, pain is pain, heartache is heartache, trauma is trauma. It's our individual journeys, and let's just honor one another. Yeah, beautiful.
Absolutely. And I think it can also give us a renewed appreciation for life, you know, a sunset, a walk in the woods. I know you're at Hilton Head, a walk along the beach, whatever the place is where you feel like in tune with your soul and nature. For me, just because, I grew up in like a lot of wealthy people in dysfunctional background. Uh, a lot of times, maybe you just take your spouse for granted or your partner, what have you. And there's not a day that it doesn't go by when I say just, thank you, Jesus, for my wife. Not one day, because I've experienced a different kind of upbringing. It makes me so appreciative. I think it also can give you some empathy, a desire to help others. I mean, it can be good that comes out of it. You don't go through life just on autopilot, typically. You go through life feeling blessed. Every moment, every day, every relationship, you don't take things for granted. At least, I don't know. I try not to. I'm not perfect, but does that make sense? Like there can be everything is the colors are more vivid, right? And the rainbow and the trees and everything is just more real, if that makes sense.
Yes. Oh my God. So one of my previous podcast guests, and we met through the show, and she had come in to visit this week. And so we were like, oh, let's go to lunch and let's go shopping together. And so we were in this little, like, I don't know, it's this little shop that had like stones and crystals and just these beautiful like jewelry and everything. And I'm not kidding. I stood in front of some of this stuff and I was like, I have never seen this color blue before. I was so excited about the simplest little thing of these beautiful, vibrant colors in these stones. But that's truly how I live my life. So I totally resonate with what you're saying. I'm the person that sings to the lizards and talks to the butterflies and notices the sunset and gasps at it and makes everybody jump because I'm so excited by it. But it's true because I've lived through hell and horrors that I so appreciate uh everything, and even getting sick on this island from, I had exposure to mold, got very, very sick. I still say, holy moly, I am so glad we live here. I am so glad. Like, we have a palm tree in our yard, and that's exciting. So
And your attitude is wonderful. I love the phrase you have behind you, choose happy. Probably could be choose joy, choose, I don't know what, love of life. I mean, I love that. It's so many of the folks that we've had, and I know you've had, they do choose happy. They do choose joy, despite the circumstances. And that is to me amazing. And I'm sure you find that too. When you chat to other people and other people on your show, it enriches your own experience. I now look back and think what I went through in a sense is a blessing. Obviously not the instability to my family and the employees and all, but in terms of my own life, I'm free. I'm free to lead my own life, which I never would have been. I never would have got out voluntarily. My kids are free to choose their own life. They don't have to choose, they don't have to worry about the whole expectations of the family business. It's just there's just so much blessing that has come out of it. And yeah, that's just so many folks I run into. So what I went through was a blessing. And how could
yes,
that be? And these are
right.
horrific experiences. A teenage girl that was diagnosed as a quadriplegic after diving into an above ground pool in suburbs of Sydney. How could that be a blessing? Well, she feels like the woman she is now would not have been possible without what she went through. Is that true? I don't know, but that's her truth and that's her perspective. So it's there can be a real. I do now see what I went through is a blessing. I have a wonderful life. I love what I do, and I feel blessed.
Yes,
I don't
me
know. To
too.
me, it's like you could say choose happy. You could say choose to feel blessed. You know, I don't at all underestimate how hard it is to say that. You know, I certainly wouldn't say on somebody's worst day, "Hey, it's your worst day, but be happy, choose happy, feel blessed." Neither of us would say that on somebody's worst day.
No, no.
One would hope and pray of a time they would get there through our love and support and friends, love and support and others. But I think it is, and I'm an optimist by nature, but I think it's possible. I've seen too many people make that choice, choose to be happy, choose to feel blessed. I
Right.
can't say it's not possible anymore. There's too many folks that have chosen that path.
Yes. And I love that idea of, yeah, it doesn't have to be choose happy, but choose gratitude, choose whatever it is that just will help you. Because even in those darkest moments, if you can just find that one thing to hold on to, I mean, that's where hope lies, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, I certainly could sit here, and talk to you for hours on end, but I wanted to give you an opportunity to close out. And if there's any words of wisdom or anything, insights you want to share, some final thoughts with folks.
Yeah, I mean, we say this a lot. As I mentioned, your worst day does not have to define you. And one of the things we say a lot is, that people come from different spiritual, religious paradigms, but there's sort of one paradigm that I think unites it all is everybody wants to feel joy and fulfillment in life. Everybody does. Well, you don't find joy and fulfillment by being focused on yourself in terms of your own agenda, money, wealth, power. Joy comes from, as we call, leading a life of significance, a life on purpose dedicated to serving others, whatever that means to you. So when you focus your life in some ways to bless others, that's where joy and fulfillment. Now, you might agree or disagree with, I wish that wasn't true, but you could talk to any psychologist, any therapist, any major religion, they would tell you that's true. And so I don't use the word truth lightly, but to me, that is universal truth. And pretty much every guest we've had, they're all leading lives of significance. And that brings them joy, drops of grace, drops of healing. So I'd say in summary, don't let your worst day define you, but think of how can I use what I went through to bless others? That's the right thing to do, and it will provide some measure of healing for you. I don't mean to say all the pain will go away, but some drops of grace, and you will have a joyful life, a fulfilled life. So I suppose that's maybe just some summary thoughts.
Well, amen. Because yes, I call this my soul work to everybody. And I say, because it doesn't feel like work. I mean, when I was getting ready to come on this morning and I was looking at my schedule and writing everything, I had an 8:30 call that I needed to do. And daughter's got a 6 p.m. art show that I need to go to. But I wrote down 10 o'clock interview with Warwick. And I got so excited because I was like, oh, I get to see Warwick again. I get to chat with him and catch up. And so, because to me, again, it brings joy to me to, put these messages of hope and healing and love and light and goodness out into the world. So yeah, so thank you for being here and sharing your beautiful work and your mission and light. Yeah, just feel honored.
Well, thank you, Teri. And I love what you do at the Healing Place and that you provide healing and hope for people. And that's a huge thing.
Well, thank you. Thank you. All right. So last thing, how do folks connect with you? Where do they find you, your book and all that fun stuff?
Yes, my book you can find on Amazon and other places. Crucible Leadership: Embrace Your Trials to Lead a Life of Significance. You can find more about me and what we do at beyondthecrucible.com. I'm active on LinkedIn under my name, Warwick Fairfax, Warwick with a silent W in the middle, and Facebook under Beyond the Crucible. And of course, our own podcast, Beyond the Crucible, where you'll hear stories of hope amidst all sorts of different challenges. So those are just some ways to find out more about us and about me.
Wonderful. All right. Well, thank you again. Thanks everybody for joining us today on the Healing Place podcast. And remember, until next time, be gentle with yourself. Thanks. Bye-bye. Hey everybody, Teri Wellbrock here. Just wanted to thank you again for being a part of this healing space and my hashtag Hope for Healing journey. Thank you for sharing, liking, inviting others to join, listening in. You've really helped this show blossom. It has now been downloaded in 136 countries and is in the top 2% globally out of 3.2 million shows, which is just amazing. And it's all because of you and your tuning in and inviting others and sharing and liking and loving. And your reviews on Apple really help too. My goal is to hit 100 5-star reviews by the end of the year. And I am closing in on that. So if you are listening in on Apple or Apple Podcasts, please go and rate the show and leave a review if you absolutely love it. And I would be most appreciative. Also, if you would like to receive my monthly Hope for Healing newsletter, please be sure to go to teriwellbrock.com. It's Teri, just one R, WELLBROCK.com. And I have a gift to send you for signing up for that monthly Hope for Healing newsletter. Plus, there are many other resources listed on that page, including a resource library. All right. Thanks. Bye-bye.